Hi everybody and welcome to this week's live stream. How's it going? Thank you for your patience for those of you who are here on time, and I'm a little late today. Had a couple little technical things I was dealing with, but here I am. I'm still kind of dealing with them, but I'm gonna make it work. So I hope you guys are doing great. I am gonna loading up over there to see if I'm gonna be able to see the chat back in my chair. So for now, I'm actually just gonna stay up here for a moment. So I hope you are all having a great Thursday so far. We are back in action with the weekly live stream, and we are doing more 17th century music today. We did part 1 2 weeks ago, and we'll do a little recap of the recent live streams in case you haven't caught them all. I have a ponytail today. I don't usually do ponytails on the live streams, but it is too hot. The heat has come, and I can't run the AC, as I've said a million times, for the live stream, so just trying to stay cool. But I have experience playing in extreme conditions, having most of my career been on the East Coast, and most of my performances being in churches that are not very well climate controlled. I did one of my Bass Sounds Evolved solo recitals, one of the album release concerts, in an 85-degree church with, maybe it was 80 degrees because it was evening, which that doesn't sound hot, especially to like desert people. But when it's like 85% humidity, which it was, it is very, very hot. So I did an entire solo unaccompanied recital in an unair-conditioned church in 85% humidity. That was something. So I survived that. I feel I can survive anything. And then, of course, performing in really cold churches during the winter is also a part of the East Coast classical musician lifestyle. So I've done all the temperature extremes, so I'll hang in there, regardless of how overheated it gets over here. Hi, everybody. Just checking in the chat. Let's see if this... As you guys, some of you who watch the live streams know, I use a very old computer back near my seat to check up on the chat, and it is just not having a good day today, so I'm hoping it's gonna boot up. Otherwise, I can kind of check the chat on my phone, but I might not be as... It doesn't always all show up on the phone, so... Let's see, though. I'm gonna get back into my chair, because I'm over squatting on the floor right now. So let's talk about live streams in this week and what we're going to do, and I will keep waiting to see if my computer over here starts to cooperate. So if you are new here, welcome to my channel. I am Emily and I play cello, and we are doing mostly Baroque music on this channel, historical instruments, music history, learning about it, playing it, listening to it, enjoying it, all that good stuff. I always take your questions on the live streams. Like, I'm always doing Q&A, so if you have any questions about the stuff that I'm playing, what's going on, even just like music, career advice, life stuff, about being a musician, any question is fair game for today. But we are going to be focusing mostly on 17th century solo bass music. So 2 weeks ago on the live stream, was it 2 weeks ago? We did the part 1 of this, basically kind of exploring this early music for the cello. So we're going to be doing more of it today. I am going to be going over a lot of similar information from the part 1. I recommend watching the part 1 because I play different selections for the performance parts of it. But I will be kind of going over a lot of the same concepts just so that if you just kind of stumble across part 2, it will still make sense and we'll still kind of go over the stuff. And, but you should definitely, if you're intrigued by this repertoire, go check out part 1 from 2 weeks ago. And what else? We have done a lot of things on the live stream. Some of them are like kind of performances of me playing cello. Others have been kind of more practical topics for musicians. So we had like a social media and technology live stream all about kind of bringing classical music into the 21st century with modern stuff, like just modern techniques, all the stuff I do here on YouTube. We have talked about what other topics? Usually I can just rattle off every single live stream that we had, but it shows that we've had a lot of live streams since this whole stay-at-home order type stuff has been going on. And that is, of course, why I did start bringing these live streams to YouTube every single week instead of just once a month. So thank you to everybody who's been tuning into the live streams. They've been so much fun. I've really enjoyed connecting with you guys every single week, getting to play for you, coming up with new ideas and topics. I have done some live streams playing duets with myself, and I have a little teaser of something we're going to do related to that at the end today, if my speaker doesn't die of batteries. In fact, I think I will turn it off because we're going to probably do that excerpt at the end. So this is going to probably make a noise. Nope. Oh, maybe it sleeps. I rarely use this speaker, but I'll go over how to use it because it's a cool technique if you want to play with yourself, what I'm going to be showing. So I feel so detached from you guys because I can't see the chat right now back here. I'm trying to get it to work over here on the computer, but I trust you're all here and with me, so thank you. So let's talk about the 17th century. So the violin family instruments, which is what we think of as the violin, viola, cello, and the upright bass, that is the violin family. The violin family instruments really came around in the 17th century, which is the 1600s. There were other string instruments prior to the 17th century. Mostly the ones that are closest to the violin family are called the viol family, V-I-O-L, also known as the viola da gamba, one of the larger versions of the viol family instruments. Those instruments were around in the Renaissance and before the violin family instruments were really around. So when the violin family came around in the 17th century, it was sort of building on what the viol family instruments had done, but then started to take it into a whole new direction, especially moving into the 18th century and, of course, beyond. So we're going to be diving into some more of the 17th century stuff, and what I've talked about in the past about the cello in the 17th century. And this is my Baroque specified cello. It was not actually built during the Baroque period, but I have gut strings on here. I'm tuned to 415. I have no end pin. I am playing with a Baroque bow that is roughly an 18th century model of a bow, but works fine for 17th century music. Not everyone's going to have a separate set of equipment for 17th versus 18th century. We tend to lump them together as Baroque music, so that's totally fine to be using an 18th century bow for 17th century music. But the cello was really a bass line instrument. That was its main function when it came into creation. So the way that we understand the modern cello today, especially solo music for the modern cello with high positions and thumb position and all this stuff and complicated double stops, that was not really how the cello was being used in the 17th century at all. And even in the solo music, it was really still performing a bass function. So you're going to notice with a lot of this music just how much the cello really plays in the bass range, and even the solo parts, they're not very melodic in the sense of how we understand melody. They're going to be much more oriented towards the bass line and the root of the chords and stuff like that. I am really not having the best luck over here with this, so let me see if I can check in with you guys here on my phone. So we are going to be doing some similar music to what we did in the first live stream of the 17th century music. Some of the same composers, because there are actually only a small handful of composers that wrote solo-based music during this time that, survived. But there is, of course, music out there. It's just a little bit on the more obscure side. But for me, for example, I have always loved the 17th century music. It just spoke to me the most. I really always loved playing basso continuo or playing bass lines in the Baroque. So playing the 17th century music is much more like playing bass lines, which is really what I love. So I think that's part of why this repertoire, I connect with it so much. And I have, while some of these pieces are obscure and not the easiest to find recordings of, I have recorded a lot of them myself on my Bass Sounds and Bass Sounds Evolved albums, which came out in 2013 and 2014. Mostly the first bass sounds is what focuses on 17th century. So if you want to listen to recordings of some of these pieces, I do have some of them out on Bass Sounds. So you can look at that on Spotify, iTunes, even Bandcamp, wherever you like to get your music. You can find my albums by searching Emily Davidson or Bass Sounds, but there are probably a couple things called Bass Sounds. Kind of a common name. Let's see here if I can see what's going on with you guys. Though I'm slowly getting a little closer to getting the computer to work. Here we go. So other live stream topics. It's kind of surprising to me how they're all escaping me now, but we've definitely had some fun times these past, I want to say it's been at least 6 weeks now that we've been doing weekly live streams, so It's just great to have you guys. All right, here we go. Now I can see a little bit of the chat. Let's get this figured out. Thank you guys for your patience today. I know we're kind of having a slow start here. And if you're watching the archive, you can always skip this little beginning part as we get settled. Here we go. Okay, now I can see your guys' comments, at least a little bit. I'm going to have to keep checking the phone, but I think I will do that. So, a couple little other things about the 17th century music that I'll just kind of go over again, mostly that were more covered in depth in the part one, is other than the fact that this music is going to be very baseline oriented, we are also dealing with some notation differences from the 17th century. And I did show these on the last one, but I like to show them again. A lot of the music I'm going to be, oh sorry, I forgot my head was cut off. A lot of the music that we're going to be doing today, I'm actually using modern print editions, but one of the reasons that we so commonly use modern print editions for 17th century music is because the notation style was so different. Now, a lot of people who are familiar with Baroque performance know that we like to use handwritten facsimiles, copies of handwritten facsimiles from the Baroque period in general when we're doing performance practice. And there's what's called performers facsimiles and neatly written but still historical parts that we like to play from. And I really do prefer to play from those parts whenever I'm playing Baroque music. But for the 17th century, things were even a little bit more crazy and different than they became in the 18th century. So here's an example, and again, I did show these last week. But so the biggest thing to notice here about this is that there is no beaming for the 8th notes and the 16th notes. So all these fast notes, they just have their own little flag on them. Whereas, of course, in modern notation, or even just notation that came slightly after this, we started beaming together 8ths and 16ths, which really helps us for, sight reading and just seeing the rhythms on the page. When we see the notes beamed together, we group them in our minds. So it becomes really difficult when we have all these fast notes that are not even beamed. So typically people playing 17th century music prefer not to use the manuscript part for that reason. That's one of the reasons at least. But as long as you're playing from an edition that doesn't have a ton of editorial markings, you can absolutely still make it work. The biggest danger in playing from modern parts is just editorial markings that are not in line with a historical approach. Be that dynamics, bowings, even articulation markings. So you really want to know your edition, and if you're trying to play a piece and you can only find a modern edition, making sure you kind of like detach from the editorial markings if they're not historically informed, which it doesn't mean they're bad, it's just a different approach, and if you're trying to play more historical, you don't want to be following a modern editor who's like Russian schooled, not thinking about the history of the performance practice. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's see. So why don't I will do one little warm-up scale that I think is kind of relevant for this repertoire, and then we'll just get into playing some of it and taking any questions if you guys have them. Let's go, old computer. I know you can do it. I don't even use this computer for anything except monitoring the chat when I do live streams, so the poor thing, I think, just wants to leave this world. But okay. So one thing that we get for virtuosity in the 17th century for all instruments, but we're going to see it in the bass music, is fast separate bow 16th notes. So virtuosity in the later years became a lot more about, there were longer slurs in general, higher positions, double stops. These were all the technical things that became, much more the show-offy, virtuosic things people wanted to see. But in the 17th century, it was more just about a separate bow fast stroke, and you're going to see that in all of this repertoire. So for a warm-up, I'm going to choose a bow stroke that kind of uses that. Hello, everybody. I'm trying to check in with the chat on my phone. Forgot to even check the levels on my mic. I'm like pretty scattered today, so I apologize for that, you guys. Okay, hope that's not going to be too loud. We're getting there, except now I think I just unmuted the computer. let's get tuned and do a warm-up. And I realize I gotta fix this too. We're doing it all on the fly today. Okay, so we're going to start with our separate bow stroke. Actually, I want to do one more smooth legato warm-up, then I'm going to do my separate bow fast stroke, and then we'll get into the repertoire. So I'm going to do my long, short stroke. I do this for warm-ups all the time on the live stream. It's great for getting the fingers of the right hand to be mobile and flexible, which is really what we need for good articulation and variety in our bow stroke is flexible fingers. So this bow stroke is great for that. So that was my slower warm-up stroke. Let's go now to a fast separate bow 16th. Let's see if this is gonna work. I love doing a separate bow stroke for my warm-ups like that if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of it, just to get the feeling of really gripping the gut strings in that fast speed. It is something that takes a little getting used to if you haven't played on gut strings before, but it's a stroke you want to master because, like I said, the 17th century repertoire in particular, you're just going to see that separate bow, fast bow stroke constantly. So it's a great thing to really get used to the response of gut strings and be able to apply that bow stroke. And people who've watched me before know I always try to take inspiration from the pieces I'm working on and take bow strokes from those pieces, bow patterns, any kind of bowing thing I'm going to have to do, and apply that bowing to a scale that is relevant maybe even to the piece, like the same key for the scale. So because so much of what we do in performance practice on Baroque instruments comes from the right hand instead of the left, since we're not using vibrato as our main expressive tool, we really need the right hand to be on deck, as expressive as possible. So doing these warm-ups on scales or even open strings is where you want to start when you're getting used to a bow stroke. It really does go a long way of spending that time developing the language of the right hand. Oh guys, we almost got it here. It's looking like we're rounding the bend and I'm finally going to be able to look at the chat. I do have the chat here on my phone. I'm just not sure how much it's updating. So once it finally loads up on the computer that I have right here, then we'll be good. But guys, feel free to talk in the chat and ask your questions. Whenever I get it all loaded up here, I'm going to go back and read whatever's there. So still enjoy the live chat as much as you guys would like, and I will be with you on there shortly. So let's get into some music, though I am going to be definitely back with the chat soon. We are going to start with some Ortiz again, and we did Ortiz last week, and I found this Ortiz that I really wanted to do. Here we go. Now I can see you guys. So I found this Ortiz that I really enjoy. It's typically written, it is written to be played with a continuo player like a harpsichord, but what I noticed, especially after doing the unaccompanied Ortiz pieces on the Part 1 live stream, is that this does not sound much different than the unaccompanied ones when played unaccompanied, so I think it actually still stands okay to be played unaccompanied, even though this piece is sort of intended to have a continuo accompaniment. So Diego Ortiz is actually a 16th century composer, so he is even earlier than most of the 17th century music we're going to be looking at. But I love to start with Ortiz selfishly because I really like the music, but also because he was pretty forward-thinking for the 16th century. I think he sort of set up a lot of the 17th century sound, and I just like his music, and he wrote a lot of it for viol family viola da gamba, which often can translate well to cello, especially the earlier music for viola da gamba. So it works nicely on cello, and I like to kind of just play viola da gamba dress up when I play Ortiz and try to get as close as I can to a viola da gamba sound. If you're not familiar with the viola da gamba, you should definitely Google it after the live stream because it's an amazing instrument with such an incredible sound. It's similar to a cello, but it has 6 or 7 strings, it has frets, and it has a little bit more of a choked sound to it. It's not as boomy and resonant as a cello, but it gives it a more ethereal kind of sound, and I just really love the sound of the gamba. So I try to get that sound as much as I can on the Baroque cello when I'm playing music that's really more intended for gamba. So this selection by Ortiz that I'm going to play is a Ricercar, and we did talk about Ricercars a lot on the last stream, but I'll just recap a little bit. Ricercar is one of the oldest surviving music types that we have, and it's basically an improvisatory movement, sort of similar to what we think of as a prelude. You know, we think of a prelude as something that often starts something out, has kind of an improvisatory nature, involves a lot of kind of exploring the key. So a Ricercar is very similar to that, and in the 17th century, almost every piece I'm going to play today is some type of Ricercar, just because that was such a popular form at the time. So this is a Ricercar by Ortiz. It's number 8, I believe, ottava, if someone wants to confirm that that's 8. Pretty sure it's 8. It's a very popular one, and if you like this Ortiz music, I have to recommend checking out Jordi Savall's album of Ortiz, because I'm a huge Jordi Savall fan anyway, but the way he plays Ortiz is just the best to me. It's the best way to be introduced to this music. So you can just search up his album on Spotify or something for Ortiz if this sounds exciting for you. So before I start, now I've got this chat working so I can close my phone out. Randy asks, have you ever thought about building your own bow? Very, very cool thought. I definitely don't feel like it feels too technical. Like, I like doing crafty things, but in a more creative, free way. I think if I had to do it with, like, measurements and I'm not, like, a big numbers person, and we're going to talk about dates with all these composers, but I am just not a numbersy person, so I feel like building would be a lot of very precise, measurements and things like that, which is not... I'm not saying I couldn't do it, but I'm not actually that detail-oriented of a person, if you can believe that. I'm kind of like more big picture creative, so having to do very small detailed work like that, I think would be a little too stressful for me or something. But I think it's amazing when people do that, especially the concept of being able to build a bow or even an instrument, and then you're the player and you get to play the thing you made. That's incredible. Just not sure I would ever actually do it. Okay, so let's get into this Ortiz. And again, throw your questions in. We got the chat up and running, so I know we got a slow start on today's stream, but thank you guys. I think we're all good to go now. Yeah, so I love this one. Just really one of my favorites. I haven't played it in a while, but I actually did perform it. It was a while ago, but I performed it at Baroque Cello Boot Camp, which is a workshop I used to run back in Boston at Harvard every winter. And we always do have a harpsichordist on staff with us for boot camp. So I was able to perform this with harpsichord a while back. That was many years ago now, at least 5. But really with harpsichord, it's next level, but I enjoyed playing it solo too. Once I played it by myself, I thought, it still stands. I'll still play it. So. And I am realizing that I probably should have oiled my strings, so I think what I'm going to do is just quickly oil them, because I like to do that on stream sometimes anyway, because then I can show people how to do that. Because I know gut strings are like a little bit of a mystery, especially if you're first starting out with them and you haven't used them a lot before and you don't really know the runaround with them. So showing how to oil the strings can be a little handy, so I will grab my oil and do that. Now I just use regular extra virgin olive oil because that's what I have in my kitchen, but it works just fine. And I just use this cotton rag, so I'm going to put some oil on this and I will show you guys what I do. Okay. It's gonna get a little darker, but a little less hot. Okay, so now I've just got my little drop of olive oil. You can use paper towel too, but you won't scratch things as badly with a cotton thing like this. So now I'm just gonna lightly rub the oil into the strings. Make sure to not go anywhere near where my bow is gonna go. We do not want olive oil on bow hair. And we do this because a gut string is, of course, natural material, and it dries out. So in the wintertime, if you live in a cold climate and you're running the heat, that is the worst possible time for your gut strings. Indoor heat will really dry them out. But also air conditioners are drying, and so that's why I'm oiling them, is I've been running my air conditioners a lot because it finally got hot here in Los Angeles, so my strings are a little dry. So just rubbing the oil in. I actually have found doing this like the night before, the strings sound even better the next day, I think, because it just spends time absorbing it. But I do think it works as a quick fix a little bit, but it's even better if it is able to sit on the strings for a little longer. Hello everybody just joining. Okay, so now we're oiled up a little bit, including my fingers. So if you ever get a really bad buzz or rattle on your silver wound gut string, so that's usually the bottom two, that, and you know you're in somewhat of a dry climate, the silver wrapping around the gut can sometimes separate from the gut if the gut dries up, and it's going to contract if it's drying, just like wood. So if the gut starts to shrivel and get dry, there'll be some space between it and the silver wrapping that'll cause kind of like a buzzing rattle. And usually oiling the strings will put some moisture back into the gut, expand it a little bit, and stop that rattle. So if you ever get a strange buzz on your bottom wound strings that are gut, that could be the problem. You know, there is not a lot of bird music, BYRD, if you're not reading the chat, for cello, as far as I know, because, I mean, that is like Renaissance, right? My lack of memorizing all the composer dates comes out. But yeah, I have never personally played anything by Bird on the cello or seen any kind of arrangement. I think it's a little bit pre-cello music. So now that we kind of set the stage with Ortiz, let's get into some more core 17th century music, or at least to our next step. So the next thing I'm going to do, let's see, what do I have for today? The next thing I'm going to play is yet another Ricercar by Degli Antoni. I will show you the book. I've showed it before because I have played these kind of a lot, but it's always worth showing for the new viewers. This edition may or may not be out of print now. I know it was hard to get for a while. But so this guy, this is a 17th century composer, and he did not write a lot of music, but he did write this set of Ricercars for a solo-based instrument, likely a cello. And I have recorded these pieces on my first Bass Sounds album, and I really like them. They definitely sound like bass lines, but I think they still have a 17th century charm about them. I definitely enjoy them, and there is some sort of theories that these are possibly meant to be bass lines to go. There's a neighbor outside that okay, he's leaving. I was like, do I have to yell at my neighbors? This is the fun of streaming out of your own home. I will if I hear too much noise. There's actually a lot of distracting stuff. If today has not seemed like a distracted enough live stream, there's distractions outside of my apartment in addition to inside my apartment. But so these pieces, there's some rumors or thoughts or theories that there may have been a violin part that went along with them, and that these were really meant to just accompany a violin part. But the violin part has not survived, and there's not exactly evidence. It's more just a theory. So I still play them as solo pieces. So I'm going to play the second Ricercar, and I did play this on one of the weekly live streams since we started up. I think I played it in one of the very first ones as just one of the selections of the performance. I have not played it on the 17th century stream yet. So let's hear a little bit of this one. And you can kind of see how there's going to be a lot of similar stuff to the Ortiz in terms of the technical usage, and it is actually going to be the same key. It's going to be D minor again. But it's advancing a little bit beyond Ortiz, because we are now, I forgot, I was going to say all the dates, even though I'm so not a date person. So Ortiz, as we mentioned, is more 16th century. He died in 1570. Now, these were published in 1687, so almost 100 years later, but they think they were written about 12 years earlier, but they were not published until 1687. So we are moving quite into the future from the Ortiz that I played, but I think it really does demonstrate how much Ortiz was kind of forward-thinking, because this music is, I think, in the same vein. Oh, Bird is later than Ortiz. Yeah, so basically, I really start my knowledge with the 17th century, though I did, in my degree, do some learning about Renaissance and 16th century, and even I was exposed to some medieval music. I know a little bit about it. Really, my studies started in the 17th century, so that's why I'm a little foggy on the dates with the 16th century guys. All right, here we are, Degli Antoni, Ricercar number 2. And that Ricercar, like the ones we did last week by this guy, Degli Antoni, they all have this extra triple time section. So they're in a duple time, like a 4/4, and then they always go into like a 6/8 or a 9/8 section before returning to a 4/4, which I think is kind of interesting because we don't see that in every Ricercar. Many of them stay the same time signature, so that's kind of cool about these pieces. So that was, I think that's just going to be the only one we played today because I did 2 of them last week. So here we go, the Ricercar by Degli Antoni, and that was, I'm sorry about my bad Italian, that was number 2. So now, let us keep on moving on. Pretty much almost no questions in the chat today, or not as many as usual, but that's totally fine. We did talk a lot about this repertoire in the part 1, so, and I know I answered a lot of questions about it then. So we have kind of like a fun surprise for the last selection. So, yeah, my Italian is really not. The only language that I took other than English was French up to about 10th grade. and I was not very good at it. I am really good at the English language, and that's about it. Um, yeah, it's kind of crazy that I got as far as I did studying European music without actually speaking another language. But I speak a lot of little parts of the languages. Again, you can only play so many Italian operas and so much Bach before you don't know how to say, like, my God and my heart in, like, every Romance language. But that's about it. So now I am going to play a selection from Vitaly. I have done some of the Vitaly pieces plenty of times before. So Vitaly, his dates are 1632 to 1692. So that puts him roughly in the same time frame as the last piece. And while his pieces that are published for a solo-based instrument, likely like a cello or a viola da gamba, are not Ricercars, actually. They are ground bass pieces, which means they are based on popular bass lines from the time period. And if you don't know about ground bass, it's one of my favorite topics in Baroque music, and I do have some videos about it. And I didn't get to say this yet today, but if you're intrigued by any of this information about my historical instrument or this repertoire or how I play, I really encourage you to dive into the instructional videos playlist here on my channel, because I've made a lot of videos that are kind of more formal in terms of just teaching this information. So there's a lot of stuff you can kind of check out if you want to know more about this. But, and I have recorded some of these Vitaly pieces also as more formal recorded videos for YouTube. But ground bass is, it's kind of like, in my opinion, set up pop chord progressions for the next hundreds of years. It's basically very popular. They're bass lines, but as we've talked about in the past, that's what last week's live stream was. It was about, I think, 5 things to know about playing Baroque music, some kind of starter pointer tips if you're trying to learn how to have a more historical approach to playing 17th and 18th century music. And so one of those things, completely lost my train of thought. It's amazing to me how distracted I am today, especially because I'm not really an easily distracted person, but today we're all over the place. What we talked about in that video last week, one of the pointers, is that music, especially in the 18th century and so on, was really composed from the bottom up, with the bass line first, the bass line and the basso continuo, which is the implied harmony or chords that are going on over the bass line. So a ground bass is a repeating bass line, but it's also implied harmony and chord changes. So it's basically like a chord progression. So we have, Vitaly wrote all these little solo bass pieces kind of based on these different popular bass lines. I actually have written my own improvisations on ground bass, and they're on my channel, so I can't remember if I wrote improvisation in the title. I think I know that I did one on a Passacaglia, improvising on a Passacaglia. Maybe that was the only one that I did. But yeah, I actually really enjoy doing like ground bass ornamenting, because I always kind of struggled with like free form, total improvisatory from nothing, at least for most of my classical training. I didn't feel comfortable doing that kind of thing. But improvising over a bass line, like over a ground bass, there's like a structure in place which really helped me feel free to explore. I need like some sort of like structural boundaries to feel like I know what the walls are, and therefore I can kind of play around and experiment. So I really enjoy actually making ground bass improvisations of my own. And I actually, if I ever record another album, a 4th album, I want it to be, I actually don't want to do spoilers, because I don't trust people to not take my ideas, sadly. And I'm okay with people taking my ideas if my ideas are already out there, but since I haven't done this album yet, I'm actually not going to reveal all the details. But if there's ever another Baroque cello album coming from me, it would tie into a lot of this stuff. Bill asks about how has LA been for the cellist music scene. In the days of the coronavirus, there's no such thing as a music scene anymore, so it's kind of like a moot point to even talk about the scene here. But there's an okay amount of classical music in LA area, but things are more geared here in LA towards like film scores and video game stuff and just stuff that's a lot more contemporary than the older traditions. I lived in Boston for 7 years before LA, so Boston's a very historical city with a rich history and very tied to its roots with, old institutions like Harvard that are very tied to the history. So Boston had a great climate for lots of classical and specifically early and Baroque music. It's not quite like that here in LA. So I shifted to doing more kind of online, more YouTube stuff and things like that since I've been here rather than gigging. I sort of shifted my focus over those last few years. But anyway, let's get into this ground bass piece that I'm going to play by Vitaly. This is a Bergamasca, which is, again, a popular ground bass pattern. So that was a Bergamasca by Vitaly, one of my 17th century favorites. I've played a lot of his. I usually play like his Chacona. I think there's another one, but I love ground bass pieces. I love 17th century solo music, so these Vitaly pieces are like my bread and butter. So that was our penultimate selection, and for the last one, we're doing something kind of fun, except I will, again, with the chaotic theme of this live stream being a little kind of scattered and chaotic, I am going to be playing a two-part thing. This is a very famous canon by Gabrielli. I did play one of Gabrielli's Ricercars on the part one of the 17th century music. Gabrielli was there are a lot of Gabriellis. This is a Gabrielli with a double L. And he wrote mostly solo cello music in the 17th century. And if you're studying Baroque cello, you should definitely be playing some of the Gabrielli Ricercars. There's some discussion that he likely played with a differently tuned cello. I'm going to be playing in a standard tuned cello today. I am tuned down to 415, which is a half step lower than our regular A440. But I have an ADGC regular tuning. Gabrielli likely used what's called the Bolognese tuning, which has the A, the top string, tuned down to a G. So some of us are familiar with that from the 5th Bach cello suite, which is often performed with that tuning as well. That is not what is called a scordatura tuning, which is when a composer indicates to specifically retune certain strings based on a specific piece. That's called scordatura. This was actually just a different tuning style based on the city. and what was going on at the time. So, but I'm just going to be playing this in standard tuning, and this is a canon, so what's really cool about it is it's the two parts are just the same part starting a measure later, as we know what a canon is. So what I did was shortly before the live stream, I recorded myself playing this, and I'm going to perform it as a canon playing with myself like I've done in the past. I will say that my recorded first version is a little bit, timing-wise, was not the most precise, so I'm going to do my best to sync up with my other performance, but it might get a little funky in some areas, we'll see. And so my technique of doing this playing with myself technique that I like to teach people who want to do this at home for fun, my super simple approach. I mean, I have, some nice pieces of technology that I'm using, but the approach is simple. So what I do is I use the Voice Memos app on my iPhone. Every smartphone has some way to just record audio with no video or anything, just the audio. On most iPhones, it's Voice Memos. So I open up Voice Memos, and I just on my phone, using no extra speaker or anything, I just record myself playing the part. Then I link up to my Bluetooth speaker that I'm going to play out of, and I just play back the part that I recorded straight out of Voice Memos out of the speaker. And I'm just going to be playing along with it. So when I did the duet live streams where I played duets with myself, it was the same technique. It's a really fun way to just be able to play with yourself. So like I said, I rushed a little bit in the other recorded. I don't use click tracks when I do these, so it's going to be a little interesting, but I think it'll still work. And I really did want to include this Gabriele canon because it is a great staple of the solo cello music. Solo, I mean, it's meant to be played as a canon, but you can learn it as a solo piece. And I just thought it would be a good thing to feature. So this will be the last thing I'm going to play for today, though. So if you have any lingering questions, you should get them in like while I'm playing or shortly so that I can see them right after I'm done before the stream ends. And thank you guys so much for tuning in today and just bearing with me through some of the weird hiccups of today. I so appreciate all the support I've been getting on these live streams. It's been so great to play for you and talk to you and answer your questions every week. And I know a lot of people have been enjoying them, so thank you guys for that. If you feel so inclined to donate to me, it's super appreciated. It's of course not required, but it's a very kind gesture and it shows me the value of these live streams. You can do that with either the links down below if you feel like it. You can also consider joining my Patreon, which is basically my hardcore supporters who help support every video that I put out on the YouTube channel. They've been supporting me since 2015. Patreon has really helped this YouTube channel thrive and grow because I had such great support from my patrons. So if you're interested in being more of like an ongoing supporter, definitely check out my Patreon. That's linked in the bio. In the description, of course, because I can't talk today. But if you're just enjoying the stream, just subscribing to the channel and giving the video a thumbs up is also a great help. So thank you for doing that. So let's check out this Gabriele canon. I'm just going to check the volume on the speaker before I start playing. Okay, it might be a little loud, but it'll be easier for me to hear and play along with. So here we go, the Gabriele canon. gonna find my way back. There we go. That's what's kind of fun or cool about a canon. So it literally is, there's no two parts, you know, both parts are playing the exact same thing straight through, one measure after the other. So if something funny like that happens or I get off, I know I'm just one measure behind, so all I did was wait till it got to a point, and then I hopped back in. Yeah, I rushed a lot. I recorded that very shortly before the stream started, so it had the energy of rushing, and so it's definitely much harder to do a canon or do something that has to line up vertically if there's any kind of time stretching, especially because everything is, you know, one measure behind. So if you want to stretch in a spot, and this is true if you're playing with a real person also playing the canon part, if you want to stretch in a spot, it has to make sense for the previous measure to also stretch in that same spot because the two measures are being played simultaneously. So there's always like an interesting set of challenges with something like this, but it's also kind of like a fun little science experiment, canons, especially ones that are this complex. So I thought it was kind of fun to end on that. So there we go. There we have it. So I would say part 2 of the 17th century stuff was not quite as dense with information as part 1. So if you only came across part 2, you should definitely check out part 1. It's a little bit more, better overview, more discussion really about the repertoire and the dates. But I was glad that we could follow up and do a little more because when combined with the talking, there's not a ton of time to play a lot of music. And last time, I didn't feel like I got to play all the 17th century stuff I really wanted to. So got to do a couple more today and go through stuff. So we are coming up on hitting our hour. I know I started a little bit late, but thank you guys so much for tuning in again this week, and I will be back next week. Not sure what the topic will be yet, but as I've said in the past, I'm always open to your guys' ideas, suggestions, you know, even specific repertoire if you have the music, things like that. You know, I love to at least hear from you guys and know what kind of stuff you're interested in seeing more of. And I do try to do a balance between playing and teaching, like even sometimes the streams are just kind of talking about stuff, sometimes they're more focused on just playing. I'm always trying to balance that out and have a good mix of both. So there we have it for this week. We will be back next week. Any other announcements? Definitely check out all the other live streams we've been doing because I feel like these have been really fun and interesting and kind of cool to dive into. And I am doing these live. Right now I am doing 2 p.m. Pacific every Thursday for these streams. I've thought about moving the time. Sometimes I consider doing them earlier or earlier in the week. It seems like this is a really good time for a lot of people. But as we saw earlier in the stream, it tends to be kind of like a noisier, more active time in my building, I think later in the week and later in the afternoon. So it's a toss-up if it's worth it for me to move the stream time so it's more low-key where I am, but then other people might not be around to watch live. So I'm still playing around with the exact timing. But for now, this is the time and day that we're keeping. So thanks again, everybody, and I will see you all next week. Bye.